the girl who rose to the sky. The night lay thick over Thebes, and the Nile reflected the silver sheen of the moon as if the river itself were holding its breath. Palms whispered softly in the warm breeze, their fronds swaying like the gentle hands of guardians watching over the land. Far away, the silhouettes of temples loomed against the starlit sky, monumental shadows standing as eternal witnesses to the cycles of kings and gods. In the quietest, most secret chamber of the royal palace, a small life began, an arrival that would alter the course of history in ways no one yet understood. Hatshepsut entered the world with a cry that seemed ordinary at first, but within that sound lay a promise, a determination and strength beyond the ordinary, a quiet defiance that would one day echo through the corridors of palaces and across the sands of Egypt. Courtiers and attendants paused in their duties, sensing something different in the child, a spark of something divine. The priests whispered among themselves, noting the signs in the stars, in the flickering torches, in the unusual calm of the Nile that night. This child, they said, would not simply grow up in the shadow of kings. She would cast her own long shadow over the land. Her father, Thutmose I, was a seasoned pharaoh, a man who had seen both triumph and treachery in the lands of Upper and Lower Egypt. His campaigns and treaties had expanded the borders of the kingdom, and his rule had been one of strategic brilliance and cautious calculation. Her mother, Ahmose, was a woman of noble lineage, descended from a long line of advisors, priests, and rulers. She understood the weight of power, the delicate balance of influence, and the necessity of cunning in a court where ambition ran as deeply as the Nile itself. Together they embodied the union of strength and wisdom, and Hatshepsut inherited both. As a child, Hatshepsut displayed intelligence that startled her tutors. She learned to read the sacred hieroglyphs with an ease that suggested not only memory but comprehension. She absorbed lessons in arithmetic, geometry, and architecture, yet it was her understanding of human nature that set her apart. Even at a young age, she watched the subtle exchanges between her father's advisors, the courtiers and the priests of Amun. She noticed who deferred to whom, whose word carried weight, and whose ambition smoldered beneath polite words. She asked questions that made even the seasoned tutors pause. Her curiosity was insatiable, her mind already restless, sought the logic behind every ritual, every law, every story of gods and kings. From early on, she was immersed in the spiritual life of Egypt. The temples, with their towering columns and walls covered in sacred carvings, became her classrooms. Priests spoke of Ra, the sun god who traversed the sky in his golden bark, of Amun, the hidden one, lord of Thebes, and of Osiris, the god of death and rebirth. Each story, each ritual, each sacred chant imbued her with more than knowledge. It imbued her with an understanding of Egypt itself, of the land's divine and political order. She felt the weight of history pressing upon her shoulders, even before she could fully comprehend it. Yet life in the palace was not merely a matter of learning or observing. Hatshepsut's early years were filled with the small freedoms that allowed her imagination and leadership to grow. She explored the gardens, the riverbanks, and the quiet courtyards, examining stones, plants, and the insects that moved among them. She watched the rise and fall of the sun, learning from the world's rhythms. The palace walls could contain her body, but not her mind. Every secret corner and shadow became a classroom for observation and understanding. Her mother, Ahmose, played a crucial role in shaping her character. She taught Hatshepsut the delicate balance of strength and grace. Power, Ahmose would say, is not only inherited, it is earned, protected, and wielded with care. A ruler without understanding of the hearts of her people is like the Nile without water, lifeless and dry. Hatshepsut absorbed these lessons as naturally as she absorbed the hieroglyphs. Every word her mother spoke was a seed planted in the fertile ground of her ambition and wisdom. By the age of 7, Hatshepsut had already begun to notice the subtle intrigues of the court. She saw how advisors plotted, how alliances shifted like sand, and how loyalty was often tied to convenience. She watched her father interact with generals and priests, noting how respect was commanded, not simply given. Though still a child, she began to understand strategy in its most basic form: foresight, observation, and patience. She could sense, even then, that one day she would need these skills, not for play, but for survival and rule. Her early fascination with the Nile itself also informed her worldview. She observed the river's seasonal floods, understanding the delicate balance that brought fertility to the land. She saw how the river linked distant peoples, enabling trade and communication, and she began to see the land not merely as territory, but as a living, breathing entity requiring guidance and care. These observations, though seemingly simple, laid the foundation for her later decisions as a ruler who would expand Egypt's trade, commission monumental architecture, and leave a legacy visible even today. Even among the palace tutors and priests, some recognized that Hatshepsut was not merely another royal child. She asked questions that revealed insight into both human nature and divine law. She questioned why rituals mattered, why kings were considered divine, and how one could lead effectively without cruelty. Some elders were unsettled by her precocious understanding. Others saw in her a future leader unlike any Egypt had known. Her play, too, was different. While other children focused on dolls and games of chance, Hatshepsut organized miniature courts and rituals, assigning roles to the palace servants and even her peers. She practiced diplomacy with imaginary envoys, learning the subtleties of negotiation and leadership before she even walked into a council chamber. Every game, every role play, every question asked in the courtyard or along the Nile was a rehearsal for a life that would soon demand both cunning and courage. Though young, Hatshepsut already exhibited a deep awareness of her own uniqueness. She sensed that her path would diverge from that of her peers, that her destiny was intertwined with forces both human and divine. At night, when the palace was silent except for the soft rush of the Nile, she would stare out toward the temples and stars, feeling the pulse of history around her. It was as if the land itself whispered to her. A future of power, of challenge, of transformation awaited, but only if she embraced it fully. By the time she reached adolescence, the seeds of her destiny had already been sown. Hatshepsut was no longer simply a princess or a daughter of a pharaoh. She was a student of the world, a strategist in miniature, and a keeper of secrets, both sacred and political. Her intelligence, her curiosity, and her quiet strength set her apart, preparing her for the extraordinary path that would lead her to become one of Egypt's most remarkable rulers. And so, in the quiet night when she was born, the Nile reflected the moon as if to honor her arrival. The stars seemed to wink with knowledge of the future, and the temple shadows held their breath. In that small, secret chamber, Hatshepsut opened her eyes to a world that would challenge her, teach her, and ultimately crown her, not merely as a princess, but as a pharaoh whose name would rise among the greatest in history. The girl who rose to the sky had taken her first breath, and with it the first step toward destiny. Youth and education, the path of a queen. As Hatshepsut grew, the palace around her became both her playground and her classroom. The sprawling corridors of Thebes' royal residence echoed with the sounds of servants, soldiers, and scholars, a constant hum of activity that shaped the rhythm of her days. Each morning began with ritualistic prayers to the gods, the scent of incense curling through the air, and the soft chant of priests calling upon Ra, Amun, and Osiris. These ceremonies, repeated daily, were more than religious routines. They were lessons in history, power, and the subtle ways that divine authority reinforced royal rule. From a young age, Hatshepsut demonstrated an insatiable curiosity. She questioned not only the stories of the gods, but the very nature of the kingship itself. "Why does a pharaoh wear the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt?" she asked a priest one morning, her dark eyes wide with wonder. "What makes a king divine?" The priest, taken aback by her perceptiveness, responded carefully, explaining that the pharaoh was the living link between the gods and the people, a protector and executor of divine order. Hatshepsut listened intently, absorbing every word. Yet she pressed further. She wanted not just to understand the ritual, but the reasoning behind it. Her education was rigorous and multifaceted. Tutors guided her in mathematics, astronomy, and architecture, training her mind to perceive both the tangible and the abstract. She learned to read and write hieroglyphs with precision, to interpret sacred texts, and to memorize vast amounts of knowledge about Egypt's geography, history, and political structures. Yet what set Hatshepsut apart was her ability to synthesize this information. She could connect the flow of the Nile to the prosperity of her people, understand the intricacies of trade, and anticipate the consequences of political alliances before she was even a teenager. At the same time, Hatshepsut was trained in the arts of leadership. Court etiquette, diplomacy, and negotiation became her second language. She watched her father interact with generals and envoys, noting how words, gestures, and timing could sway decisions as much as armies or wealth. When her tutors staged mock councils for her, assigning roles to other children and servants, Hatshepsut observed how alliances formed and fell apart, learning to anticipate the moves of others and to act decisively when necessary. These lessons were not theoretical, they were practice for the life she would one day lead. Yet education in the palace was not solely academic or strategic. Hatshepsut was also instructed in religious rites, music, dance, and the subtleties of courtly etiquette. She learned to play the lyre and sing hymns, to participate in sacred processions, and to move with the grace expected of a royal woman. These skills were as important as mathematics or hieroglyphs because they reinforced her authority in the eyes of the priests and nobles, the men whose support could elevate or undermine a ruler. Beyond the palace, Hatshepsut's experiences in the city and along the Nile shaped her understanding of her people. She visited temples and workshops, observing craftsmen, scribes, and farmers. She asked questions about their work, their challenges, and their lives. Even as a young girl, she realized that effective rule required more than divine right. It required knowledge of the land and the people who sustained it. These excursions cultivated empathy alongside intelligence, giving her a sense of responsibility that extended beyond the palace walls. Family dynamics also played a crucial role in her development. Her mother, Ahmose, remained a guiding presence, reinforcing lessons about patience, strategy, and moral fortitude. A ruler, her mother often said, must balance strength with wisdom. Power without understanding is dangerous, even to yourself. Hatshepsut absorbed these words deeply, internalizing the principle that her decisions would carry weight not only for herself, but for the entire kingdom. Her relationship with her father was equally formative. Thutmose unrecognized early the potential in his daughter, unlike many rulers who relegated women to ceremonial roles. He encouraged her to observe military and administrative matters, often inviting her to stand alongside him during strategic discussion. Through these experiences, Hatshepsut learned the language of command, the subtle negotiation of loyalty among generals, and the delicate management of the kingdom's wealth and resources. She began to envision the scope of leadership, recognizing that ruling Egypt required vision, intelligence, and courage. Hatshepsut's interactions with her peers and palace attendants also shaped her abilities. She was not content to accept authority blindly. She questioned, tested, and learned from every interaction. In games of diplomacy and mock councils, she demonstrated an uncanny ability to anticipate responses, negotiate compromises, and influence outcomes. Her peers admired her, sometimes feared her, but all recognized that she possessed a rare combination of intellect, charm, and determination. During these formative years, Hatshepsut also became aware of the limitations imposed on women, even within royalty. While boys were trained for kingship and military leadership, girls were often expected to focus on marriage, family, and ceremonial duties. Hatshepsut, however, refused to see these constraints as absolute. She studied texts that recounted the lives of previous female rulers and regents, noting the ways they had wielded influence despite societal expectations. These stories, coupled with her own talents, strengthened her resolve to forge a path that was uniquely her own. Religious instruction remained a cornerstone of her education. Hatshepsut was initiated into the mysteries of the temple, learning sacred rites that connected her to Amun, Ra, and Osiris. She understood that the pharaoh's authority was intertwined with divine favor, and she developed a profound sense of spiritual responsibility. This connection to the gods was not simply symbolic. It would later provide her with legitimacy when she assumed power in a male-dominated hierarchy, allowing her to present her rule as sanctioned by the divine order itself. By her early teens, Hatshepsut's intellect, poise, and strategic thinking had begun to distinguish her from other members of the royal family. She had mastered not only the academic and ceremonial skills expected of a princess, but also the subtler arts of leadership, observation, negotiation, and foresight. Every lesson learned, every ritual performed, and every encounter in the palace and along the Nile reinforced her understanding of what it meant to rule. Even in leisure, Hatshepsut's mind was active. She studied the stars, interpreting their positions and movements in the context of both navigation and prophecy. She explored the natural world, noting patterns in the Nile's floods and the rhythms of agriculture. She imagined the complexities of governance, running scenarios in her mind, anticipating challenges, and devising solutions. Her childhood was a constant preparation, a blend of discipline, observation, and imagination that would serve her for the rest of her life. Through these experiences, Hatshepsut's character began to crystallize. She combined intelligence with ambition, empathy with strategic thinking, and curiosity with discipline. She understood that knowledge alone was insufficient for leadership. It had to be coupled with courage, decisiveness, and the ability to inspire loyalty. Her education, both formal and experiential, laid the foundation for a ruler who would later transform Egypt's architecture, economy, and political structure. As she approached adolescence, it became increasingly clear to those around her that Hatshepsut was no ordinary royal daughter. Her father, mother, and tutors recognized her potential, while the priests and advisors noted her precocious understanding of both divine and temporal authority. She was being shaped into a figure capable of navigating the complexities of kingship, someone who could rule with wisdom, assertiveness, and a vision that extended beyond the immediate concerns of the court. Thus the girl who had first opened her eyes beneath the silver glow of the Nile's reflection continued to grow, not merely in stature but in intellect, perception, and purpose. Each day brought new lessons, new challenges, and new insights, all of which contributed to the shaping of a queen in the making. Hatshepsut's youth was not defined solely by the privileges of birth, but by the relentless cultivation of the mind and spirit, preparing her for a destiny that few, if any, could foresee. By the end of her formative years, Hatshepsut had emerged as a figure of extraordinary capability. She was prepared not only to participate in the court's political life, but to shape it, to influence her peers and elders, and ultimately to take a place at the heart of Egypt's governance. The path of a queen had begun, and though the challenges ahead would be formidable, Hatshepsut was ready to meet them, armed with knowledge, insight, and a vision for a future she would one day command. marriage, and political crossroads. By the time Hatshepsut reached her late teens, the realities of royal life became ever more pressing. In the glittering courts of Thebes, a royal daughter was never merely a child. She was a living symbol of dynastic continuity, a key to political alliances, and potentially a vessel through which power could be consolidated or contested. Hatshepsut, acutely aware of her unique position, had already absorbed the lessons of strategy, diplomacy, and observation. Yet nothing could fully prepare her for the turning point that would come with marriage. Her union with Thutmose II, her half-brother, was as much a political necessity as it was a dynastic arrangement. Though she had been raised in luxury, surrounded by tutors and the comforts of the palace, the marriage marked a profound shift. Hatshepsut was no longer simply a princess learning to observe. She was now a queen with responsibilities that would extend far beyond the ceremonial. She understood that her influence would now be exercised in both the public eye and the shadowed corridors of the palace, where loyalty and ambition intertwined in a delicate and often dangerous dance. The marriage itself was a blend of ritual, symbolism, and political strategy. Thutmose II, though a prince by birth, was not the strong, commanding figure his father had been. He carried the crown of Egypt, but his rule lacked the decisiveness and vision of Thutmose I. Hatshepsut, however, quickly realized that this presented both challenge and opportunity. While some might have viewed her husband's weakness as a threat to her own status, she saw it as a chance to expand her influence. Her education, her understanding of court politics, and her strategic foresight equipped her to navigate this new landscape. As queen, Hatshepsut learned to balance the ceremonial duties expected of her with the subtler forms of influence available to a woman in the royal court. She presided over religious ceremonies, appeared in public processions, and fulfilled the expectations of the Egyptian people, who saw her as a symbol of continuity and divine favor. But she also observed, advised, and subtly guided policy decisions, using her position to ensure that her insights shaped the governance of the kingdom. The palace, of course, was never merely a stage for public duties. Behind closed doors, alliances shifted, ambitions clashed, and whispers of power circulated like smoke through the corridors. Hatshepsut quickly recognized that to thrive in this environment, she needed both subtlety and assertiveness. She cultivated relationships with key priests, generals, and advisors, earning their respect and trust not through overt dominance, but through wisdom, fairness, and a keen understanding of each individual's motivations. Her early education in diplomacy and strategy became a living skill, applied daily as she navigated the complexities of court life. During this period, Hatshepsut also gave birth to her daughter, Neferure, solidifying her position within the royal family and reinforcing the importance of her lineage. The presence of her child offered both personal fulfillment and political leverage. Neferure represented a continuity of Hatshepsut's bloodline and, by extension, the potential for future authority. Hatshepsut understood that every decision she made, every alliance she forged, every ceremony she attended, would shape the perception of her power, both in the eyes of the court and in the eyes of the people. Yet Hatshepsut's marriage was not without personal challenges. Thutmose II's limited authority and occasional unpredictability required her to exercise patience and discretion. She could not rely solely on force of will. She needed the support of the court, the priests, and the people to enact any significant influence. In these circumstances, her intelligence and experience set her apart. She was careful, deliberate, and strategic, learning to speak and act in ways that maximized her impact while minimizing potential threats to her position. This period also revealed the tension between gender and power in ancient Egypt. While the pharaoh was expected to embody both divine and masculine authority, Hatshepsut had to navigate societal expectations that often confined women to symbolic or ceremonial roles. Rather than allowing these limitations to restrain her, She began to craft a vision of leadership that was uniquely her own. She observed how previous female rulers and regents had asserted authority, and she learned from both their successes and their mistakes. Hatshepsut began to see that power was not simply inherited, it was cultivated, performed, and legitimized through both public perception and divine sanction. Her political acumen became increasingly apparent during crises and administrative decisions. Hatshepsut learned to mediate disputes among officials, to negotiate with neighboring states, and to oversee the management of estates and resources. She understood that effective rule required not only intelligence, but also empathy, foresight, and the ability to inspire loyalty. Her early experiences in palace councils and religious ceremonies now coalesced into a practical, real-world mastery of leadership. As she matured, Hatshepsut began to consider the future of the dynasty in a new light. Her husband's reign, though legitimate, would not provide long-term stability. Their son, Thutmose III, was still a child, and the throne would require a capable hand to maintain the kingdom's prosperity. Hatshepsut's ambition, previously tempered by observation and education, now found focus. She recognized that she could guide the kingdom not only as queen consort, but as regent, protector, and eventually as pharaoh. The realization was both empowering and daunting. It required careful calculation, alliances, and the ability to navigate the traditional expectations of male authority while asserting her own. During this time, Hatshepsut also became deeply involved in religious and ceremonial life, recognizing that spiritual authority was inseparable from political legitimacy. She participated in rituals that reinforced her connection to Amun, Ra, and other gods, understanding that divine endorsement would be essential for any assertion of power. Her skill in combining ritual, symbolism, and public perception allowed her to cultivate an aura of legitimacy that few could challenge. The combination of personal intelligence, political skill, and strategic foresight transformed Hatshepsut into a formidable figure within the palace. She became a trusted advisor to her husband, an influential mediator among nobles, and a respected presence among priests. Her influence extended beyond the ceremonial. She shaped policies, oversaw trade, and guided military decisions with a keen awareness of both opportunity and risk. The crossroads of Hatshepsut's life were now clearly visible. Marriage had elevated her status, but also presented new challenges and responsibilities. Her husband's limited authority required her to act decisively, balancing public duties with behind-the-scenes influence. Her role as mother strengthened her claim to dynastic continuity, while her strategic mind prepared her for the eventual necessity of assuming full power. Every choice she made, every alliance she nurtured, and every action she took was a calculated step along the path that would ultimately lead her to become pharaoh. It was in these formative years that Hatshepsut began to envision the extraordinary future that awaited her. She saw not only the continuation of her father's legacy, but also the possibility of expanding Egypt's power, culture, and prosperity in ways that had never been attempted before. Her education, her marriage, and her early political experiences coalesced into a vision of leadership that was both practical and ambitious, grounded in knowledge, yet guided by imagination. By the end of her early adulthood, Hatshepsut had mastered the delicate art of influence. She could navigate the complexities of palace intrigue, command the respect of officials and priests, and position herself as a central figure in Egypt's future. The crossroads she faced, between traditional expectations and personal ambition, between ceremonial duty and political power, would soon demand decisive action. Hatshepsut, equipped with intelligence, experience, and vision, was ready to step onto the stage of history. And so, at this pivotal juncture, Hatshepsut stood poised between her past as a princess and her future as a ruler. The lessons of her youth, the influence of her marriage, and the wisdom of a careful observation had prepared her for the moment when she would claim authority not merely as queen, but as Pharaoh, the first woman to do so with full legitimacy in Egypt's recorded history. The path ahead was fraught with challenge, intrigue, and expectation, yet Hatshepsut's resolve was unshakable. Her destiny, once whispered in the moonlight of her birth, was now taking concrete shape, and the kingdom of Egypt would soon witness the rise of a ruler unlike any it had known. Entering Egypt's rule, the early regency. The passing of Thutmose II marked a profound turning point in the destiny of Hatshepsut. The palace that had once been a place of observation, learning, and ceremonial practice became a stage for power, where every decision carried weight far beyond the individual. The young Thutmose III, her stepson, was still a boy, barely able to comprehend the responsibilities his birthright demanded. The kingdom required a guiding hand, and Hatshepsut, with her intellect, political acumen, and strategic foresight, was the only one capable of assuming the mantle. From the outset, her assumption of the regency was both necessary and delicate. Egypt's nobles and priests had long adhered to tradition, where male authority predominated, and even a woman of royal blood faced scrutiny when stepping into a position of control. Hatshepsut, however, understood that legitimacy could be cultivated through skillful presentation, careful alliances, and the subtle intertwining of religious authority with political power. She moved with both confidence and caution, aware that any misstep could provoke resistance or challenge. Her first acts as regent were measured, demonstrating respect for established customs while asserting her own authority. She presented herself publicly alongside young Thutmose III, emphasizing continuity and the sacred legitimacy of his lineage. At the same time, she undertook administrative reforms, overseeing taxation, trade expeditions, and temple donations. These measures were carefully designed to both stabilize the kingdom and showcase her competence. She communicated with provincial governors and military commanders, building relationships and ensuring that loyalty to the young king, and by extension to herself, was firmly established. Hatshepsut also recognized the importance of securing the priesthood, particularly the powerful cult of Amun at Karnak. The support of the high priests was essential, not only for religious legitimacy, but for the broader political influence they wielded throughout Egypt. Hatshepsut participated in elaborate ceremonies, presenting offerings and performing rituals with impeccable precision. Her mastery of ceremonial protocol impressed the clergy, who began to see in her not merely a queen regent, but a divinely sanctioned authority capable of maintaining the cosmic and earthly order. The palace itself became a theater of strategy. Hatshepsut's advisors and officials were carefully selected for loyalty, competence, and subtlety. She understood that influence could be wielded without overt force, through counsel, persuasion, and the cultivation of mutual respect. She mediated disputes, anticipated conflicts, and navigated the ambitions of powerful nobles with remarkable skill. Even in the most tense situations, she projected calm authority, a combination of intellect and composure that inspired both admiration and cautious deference. At the same time, Hatshepsut faced personal challenges inherent to her role. The position of regent required her to balance her responsibilities to the young Thutmose III with the expectations of the court, the military, and the priesthood. Each decision was scrutinized, each action interpreted for hidden meaning. She understood that power, especially as a woman in a male-dominated hierarchy, could not be taken for granted. It had to be continuously demonstrated, legitimized, and defended. Her early years of regency were marked by calculated diplomacy. Hatshepsut sent envoys to neighboring kingdoms, negotiated trade routes, and oversaw military preparedness, all while maintaining the image of a caretaker for the young king. She recognized that stability required both perception and reality. The public needed to see continuity and strength, while the underlying governance demanded careful planning, strategic foresight, and decisive action. She mastered this duality, balancing ceremonial symbolism with pragmatic administration. Religion played a central role in consolidating her authority. Hatshepsut commissioned inscriptions and monuments that depicted her as chosen by Amun, presenting herself not only as a ruler but as a divine instrument. These images and texts served multiple purposes, reinforcing her legitimacy, deterring potential challengers, and creating a narrative of divine favor that would become central to her reign. Hatshepsut understood that power in Egypt was inseparable from the gods, and she skillfully intertwined her image with sacred authority to strengthen her position. During this time, Hatshepsut also continued her personal cultivation of leadership skills. She studied maps of Egypt, memorized records of past rulers, and analyzed the successes and failures of her predecessors. She reviewed military strategies, trade agreements, and administrative decisions with a critical eye, learning to anticipate challenges and opportunities alike. Her regency was not a passive caretaker role. It was active, engaged, and visionary, laying the groundwork for her eventual claim to full pharaonic authority. Despite her outward composure, Hatshepsut faced moments of doubt and tension. Advisors sometimes questioned her decisions, nobles tested her authority, and the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. Yet she remained steadfast, drawing on the lessons of her youth, the wisdom of her mother, the guidance of her tutors, and the observation of her father's rule. Each challenge became an opportunity to demonstrate her competence, to build loyalty, and to refine her understanding of leadership. Trade and economic initiatives during the early regency were particularly important. Hatshepsut recognized that Egypt's wealth and stability depended on the flow of goods, the productivity of the land, and the support of both urban and rural populations. She organized expeditions to Punt, oversaw the expansion of agricultural estates, and ensured that temple wealth was managed effectively. These initiatives reinforced her reputation as a capable and visionary leader, capable of guiding Egypt through both prosperity and potential adversity. The young Thutmose III, though technically king, remained under her tutelage and guidance. Hatshepsut ensured that his education, training, and public appearances were carefully managed to reinforce the legitimacy of both his and her authority. She cultivated an image of partnership, presenting herself as a devoted guardian and mentor, while subtly consolidating her own influence. The balance between her protective role and her growing autonomy was delicate, yet she navigated it with remarkable skill. As her regency progressed, Hatshepsut began to contemplate the possibility of assuming full pharaonic power. She observed the limitations imposed by tradition, yet she also recognized the extraordinary opportunities her position afforded. She carefully studied the examples of past rulers, noting how women and men had wielded authority in both overt and subtle ways. These reflections would later inform the bold decisions that defined her reign and established her as one of Egypt's most extraordinary pharaohs. By the end of the early regency, Hatshepsut had transformed her position from caretaker to central authority. She was not merely a guardian for a young king. She was the de facto ruler of Egypt, commanding loyalty, respect, and influence across the kingdom. Every policy, ceremonial appearance, and diplomatic initiative reinforced her legitimacy, preparing the ground for her eventual declaration as pharaoh. The Nile flowed steadily beneath the sun, reflecting the unbroken continuity of Egypt itself. Hatshepsut, standing at the center of this ancient civilization, understood that her time had come to move beyond regency. The foundation she had built, through education, strategy, diplomacy, and religious devotion, was solid, yet the path ahead required courage, audacity, and the willingness to challenge the conventions of her time. Thus, the early regency was more than a transitional period. It was a crucible in which Hatshepsut's identity as a ruler was forged. She emerged not only as a caretaker, but as a visionary leader, ready to step into the full power and responsibility of pharaonic rule. The stage was set, the court prepared, and the kingdom waiting. The girl who had once opened her eyes beneath the silver glow of the Nile was now poised to claim her place among the greatest rulers in Egypt's history, becoming Pharaoh, seizing the throne. The transition from regent to Pharaoh was not a simple matter of ceremony. It was a carefully orchestrated assertion of authority that required both audacity and meticulous planning. Hatshepsut had spent years consolidating power, cultivating loyalty among the nobility, securing the support of the priesthood, and preparing the kingdom for her ascension. Yet the act of claiming full pharaonic authority would challenge centuries of tradition, confronting the deeply ingrained expectation that the throne belonged to a man. The moment came subtly, almost imperceptibly, but with profound consequence. Through inscriptions, monuments, and public decrees, Hatshepsut began to present herself not merely as a regent or caretaker, but as a legitimate ruler in her own right. She emphasized her divine lineage, her connection to the gods, and the blessing of Amun himself. Each monument commissioned, each temple relief carved, and each ceremonial procession carefully reinforced the narrative that her authority was not only lawful, but divinely ordained. Hatshepsut adopted the full regalia of kingship, including the traditional Nemesa headdress, false beard, and ceremonial kilt. These symbols, usually reserved for male pharaohs, communicated to the people and the court that she wielded the same power, authority, and responsibility as any king. The image was deliberate and strategic. She embraced the masculine symbols of kingship while remaining unmistakably herself, a woman of intelligence, vision, and divine favor. The priesthood played a central role in legitimizing her rule. Hatshepsut commissioned inscriptions detailing visions and prophecies that confirmed her as the chosen ruler of Egypt. One of the most important narratives described how the god Amun had appeared to her father, Thutmose I, declaring that Hatshepsut would succeed him as pharaoh. This divine endorsement was repeated in temple reliefs, ensuring that the story would reach the people and reinforce the perception of her legitimacy. Religion and politics, intertwined, provided an unassailable foundation for her unprecedented ascent. Despite careful planning, Hatshepsut's claim to the throne was not without challenges. Some nobles and officials, accustomed to male leadership, were hesitant to accept a woman as pharaoh. She addressed this by demonstrating competence, decisiveness, and strategic insight in matters of governance, military readiness, and diplomacy. She reinforced loyalty through rewards, patronage, and public acknowledgement, ensuring that those who supported her had both incentive and pride in her success. Gradually, resistance softened, replaced by recognition of her abilities and acknowledgement of her authority. Her coronation as pharaoh was a culmination of years of preparation, an event that blended ceremony, ritual, and political calculation. Hatshepsut appeared in public processions alongside young Thutmose III, emphasizing continuity and respect for dynastic lineage while asserting her own dominance. The imagery presented in temples and monuments depicted her as both daughter and chosen heir of Amun, blending divine endorsement with earthly authority. Every gesture, every offering, and every inscription communicated that she was pharaoh in fact and in spirit. Beyond ceremony, Hatshepsut acted decisively to consolidate power. She reorganized administrative offices, appointed loyal and capable officials, and oversaw the management of resources critical to the kingdom's prosperity. Trade expeditions were launched, temples received endowments, and construction projects began in earnest, demonstrating the capacity of her reign to sustain both economic and spiritual vitality. Her actions were designed not only to strengthen her rule, but also to communicate confidence, stability, and vision to all of Egypt. The political landscape of Egypt required vigilance. Hatshepsut navigated potential threats from ambitious nobles, rival claimants, and skeptical officials with a combination of intelligence and subtlety. She monitored alliances, mediated disputes, and deployed rewards and honors strategically to maintain loyalty. Her understanding of human nature, honed over years of observation and education, allowed her to anticipate challenges and act preemptively, turning potential adversaries into allies and securing the stability of her reign. Trade and foreign diplomacy flourished under her early leadership. Hatshepsut recognized the importance of Egypt's relationships with neighboring kingdoms, particularly those along the Red Sea and the lands of Punt. She sponsored expeditions that brought exotic goods, spices, and treasures to Egypt, reinforcing both wealth and prestige. These initiatives enhanced her image as a capable and visionary ruler, demonstrating that her reign could bring tangible prosperity alongside symbolic authority. Hatshepsut also commissioned ambitious architectural projects that would become enduring symbols of her power. Temples, obelisks, and mortuary complexes were not only expressions of religious devotion, but also public demonstrations of political authority. Each structure was carefully designed to reflect her divine endorsement, her lineage, and her role as a unifying figure for the people of Egypt. These monuments, with their intricate carvings and inscriptions, communicated a clear message. Hatshepsut was Pharaoh, and her reign would be remembered for generations. Her relationship with young Thutmose III remained strategically significant. Though he was technically king, Hatshepsut maintained careful oversight of his education, public appearances, and political training. She ensured that he was respected and visible as part of the royal narrative, while she exercised the practical authority of governance. This balance allowed her to assert power without overtly challenging dynastic norms, framing her reign as a protective and stabilizing force for the kingdom. Hatshepsut's personal qualities, intelligence, patience, foresight, and charisma, played a critical role in her success. She combined the skills of a strategist with the insight of a scholar and the presence of a divine ruler. Her ability to communicate authority, command respect, and inspire loyalty ensured that her unprecedented ascension was accepted by the court, the priesthood, and the people alike. The first years of her official reign were marked by careful yet ambitious actions. Hatshepsut oversaw the consolidation of power within the court, the reorganization of administrative offices, and the expansion of Egypt's influence through trade and diplomacy. She commissioned monumental inscriptions and architectural projects, each reinforcing the narrative of her divinely sanctioned authority. Through these measures, she transformed the perception of her rule from that of a caretaker to that of a sovereign pharaoh, capable of guiding Egypt into a new era of stability, prosperity, and cultural achievement. After her return to Egypt, Elvis Presley Beckett became the new CEO of Hatshepsut's bold assumption of pharaonic authority redefined what it meant to rule Egypt. She demonstrated that leadership was not limited by gender, but by vision, intelligence, and the capacity to navigate complex political and spiritual landscapes. Her reign would leave an indelible mark on the architecture, economy, religion, and political structure of Egypt, establishing her as one of the most remarkable and innovative rulers in history. By seizing the throne, Hatshepsut not only fulfilled the destiny whispered at her birth beneath the silver glow of the Nile, but she also charted a course for Egypt that combined tradition, divine legitimacy, and forward-looking vision. Her rise to power was not merely a personal achievement, it was a transformation of the kingdom itself, a demonstration that authority could be exercised with wisdom, creativity, and unwavering resolve. Thus, Hatshepsut's declaration as pharaoh marked the beginning of a reign that would be remembered for its audacity, its prosperity, and its enduring influence. She had navigated the complexities of succession, court intrigue, and societal expectation to claim her place as the ruler of one of the greatest civilizations the world had ever known. The girl who had opened her eyes beneath the moonlit Nile had become a pharaoh, her authority both absolute and visionary, and Egypt would never be the same. Prosperity and expansion, trade, architecture, and diplomacy. Hatshepsut's reign as pharaoh brought Egypt into a period of remarkable stability, wealth, and cultural achievement. Once she had consolidated her authority, she turned her attention to projects that would not only demonstrate her power, but also secure the prosperity of her kingdom. These initiatives were multifaceted, spanning trade, architecture, diplomacy, and internal governance. Her vision extended beyond mere consolidation. She sought to leave a lasting legacy that would endure through generations. One of her most ambitious projects was the expansion of trade networks, particularly with the mysterious and fertile land of Punt. Hatshepsut recognized that Egypt's prosperity depended on access to exotic goods, myrrh, frankincense, ebony, ivory, and precious metals, that could enhance both economic wealth and ceremonial offerings. Organizing the expedition to Punt was a complex logistical challenge. Ships had to be built, crews trained, supplies gathered, and diplomatic arrangements anticipated. Hatshepsut personally oversaw every detail, ensuring that the mission reflected both strategic foresight and meticulous planning. The journey to Punt was long and perilous, crossing deserts, navigating treacherous coastlines, and encountering unfamiliar lands. Yet the expedition was a resounding success. The returning fleet carried vast quantities of goods, along with envoys from Punt, creating bonds of mutual respect and diplomatic exchange. Hatshepsut commemorated the expedition with elaborate reliefs at her mortuary temple in Deir el-Bahari, depicting the voyage in vivid detail. Ships gliding across the waves, exotic animals and treasures being unloaded, and interactions with the people of Punt. These reliefs served multiple purposes, celebrating economic achievement, reinforcing her image as a capable ruler, and linking her authority to divine favor. Trade expansion was only one aspect of her reign. Hatshepsut understood that architecture could communicate power as eloquently as decrees or armies. She embarked on monumental building projects across Egypt, blending religious devotion with political symbolism. The most iconic of these is her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, nestled against the cliffs of the Theban West Bank. Designed with precision and grandeur, the temple reflected not only her reverence for the gods, but also her mastery of architectural innovation. Terraces, colonnades, and statuary conveyed a narrative of divine legitimacy, continuity of the dynasty, and the pharaoh's unique vision. In addition to Deir el-Bahari, Hatshepsut commissioned obelisks, temples, and restoration projects throughout Egypt. Each structure was carefully designed to integrate religious symbolism, practical function, and public impression. Temples were adorned with reliefs depicting her divine endorsement, victories, and ceremonial duties, ensuring that her image as a pharaoh was both omnipresent and revered. By investing in architecture, she solidified her legacy, leaving a tangible record of her reign that would endure for millennia. Diplomacy played a critical role in her strategy for expansion and security. Hatshepsut fostered alliances with neighboring kingdoms through gifts, marriage proposals, and trade arrangements. She sent envoys with carefully chosen offerings, demonstrating Egypt's wealth and sophistication while cultivating peaceful relations. This approach minimized conflict and reinforced her image as a wise and capable ruler. By combining diplomacy with displays of prosperity, she positioned Egypt as a powerful yet approachable civilization, respected across the region. Military preparedness remained an underlying concern. though Hatshepsut herself did not lead campaigns as her successors would. She ensured that the army was well-trained, well-supplied, and loyal, capable of defending Egypt's borders and trade routes. Her strategic oversight balanced the need for security with her preference for diplomacy and commerce, creating a stable environment in which culture, trade, and architecture could flourish. Hatshepsut's internal policies reflected the same combination of practicality and vision. She oversaw the administration of Egypt's provinces, ensuring that governors executed their duties effectively and that resources were allocated efficiently. Agricultural production, taxation, and labor were carefully managed, sustaining both the economy and the monumental construction projects that defined her reign. Her governance combined attention to detail with a broad strategic perspective, ensuring that Egypt thrived under her leadership. Religious devotion was inseparable from Hatshepsut's policies. She strengthened the cult of Amun, endowed temples, and commissioned rituals and festivals that reinforced both her divine legitimacy and the spiritual vitality of the kingdom. Through these actions, she intertwined the prosperity of the state with religious observance, creating a cultural cohesion that reinforced loyalty and public reverence. Her strategic use of religion exemplified her understanding of the inseparable nature of spiritual and temporal authority in ancient Egypt. Hatshepsut also cultivated her personal image through art, inscriptions, and ceremonial representation. Reliefs and statues portrayed her as both pharaoh and divine intermediary, often depicting her with masculine symbols of kingship, yet highlighting her unique presence and intelligence. These artistic choices were deliberate, blending tradition with innovation to create a lasting and authoritative image of her rule. The visual narrative she crafted reinforced her power, projected stability, and communicated her achievements to both contemporaries and future generations. Cultural advancement was another hallmark of her reign. Hatshepsut promoted scholarship, art, and literature, ensuring that the intellectual and creative life of Egypt flourished. Scribes, architects, and artisans were employed in vast numbers, their work both practical and symbolic, contributing to temples, monuments, and public infrastructure. By supporting education and artistic endeavors, she cultivated a vibrant cultural environment that reflected the prosperity and sophistication of her kingdom. Her legacy of prosperity extended beyond material wealth. Hatshepsut's reign represented a period of innovation in administration, architecture, and governance. She demonstrated that strategic vision, combined with intelligence and divine legitimacy, could transform Egypt's political, economic, and cultural landscape. The monuments, trade networks, and diplomatic ties she established laid the groundwork for future pharaohs, creating a stable and prosperous environment in which the kingdom could continue to thrive. Hatshepsut's reign also challenged traditional notions of gender and authority. By exercising full pharaonic power, she demonstrated that leadership was determined not by gender, but by skill, intelligence, and legitimacy. Her example would resonate through history, inspiring future rulers and challenging societal expectations. She proved that a woman could not only maintain stability but also expand, innovate, and elevate her civilization to new heights. As the Nile flowed steadily, carrying life and sustenance to the heart of Egypt, Hatshepsut's vision unfolded in the form of grand temples, flourishing trade, and enduring monuments. Her reign was marked by a harmony of prosperity, religious devotion, and strategic governance, reflecting a ruler who understood the complexities of power and the responsibilities of leadership. Every decision, every project, every diplomatic engagement was a testament to her foresight, intelligence, and determination. By the end of this period, Hatshepsut had firmly established herself as one of Egypt's most remarkable pharaohs. Her achievements in trade, architecture, diplomacy, and governance created a legacy that would endure for centuries. She had transformed the kingdom, leaving a tangible record of her reign that blended divine legitimacy, with practical accomplishment. Hatshepsut's vision, intelligence, and authority ensured that Egypt prospered under her leadership, and her story would be remembered as a pinnacle of human ambition, creativity, and strategic mastery. Challenges and opposition, navigating court intrigue. Even as Hatshepsut's reign reached its zenith, her authority was not without challenge. The Egyptian court, a labyrinth of ambition, loyalty, and hidden rivalry, was a place where every decision could provoke admiration or resentment. Power, especially in a kingdom where tradition privileged male rulers, demanded constant vigilance. Hatshepsut understood that to sustain her unprecedented rule as a female pharaoh, she had to navigate this complex web of political intrigue with extraordinary skill. Some of the earliest opposition came from officials who questioned her legitimacy, despite her carefully cultivated image as the divine choice of Amun. Whispers circulated in the corridors of the palace. Could a woman truly wield the authority of a king? Hatshepsut addressed these doubts not with confrontation alone, but with a combination of diplomacy, demonstration, and strategic favor. She rewarded loyalty, subtly sidelined dissent, and showcased her confidence through economic prosperity, military readiness, and religious devotion. Her ability to manage perception was as critical as her exercise of power. The priests of Amun, central to Egyptian religious and political life, were both allies and potential threats. While many supported Hatshepsut's divine narrative, others hesitated to fully embrace a female pharaoh. Hatshepsut deepened her engagement with the priesthood, commissioning lavish offerings, temple renovations, and ceremonial rituals. She portrayed herself in inscriptions as chosen by Amun and depicted in the traditional regalia of kingship, emphasizing continuity and divine favor. By intertwining her authority with religious devotion, she minimized the risk of ecclesiastical opposition. Within the royal family, tensions simmered quietly. Thutmose III, though young during her ascent, was technically the king. His supporters and courtiers occasionally tested Hatshepsut's authority, reminding her that her position rested partly on his minority. She maintained a delicate balance, presenting herself as protector and mentor while subtly consolidating her own power publicly. She emphasized continuity and shared legitimacy, yet she carefully controlled the levers of actual governance. This nuanced approach allowed her to neutralize potential internal threats while reinforcing the image of stable leadership. Political rivals also emerged among ambitious nobles and provincial governors. Some resented the centralization of power under a female pharaoh, believing it diminished their influence. Hatshepsut responded with calculated tact. She rewarded loyalty generously and addressed grievances diplomatically, demonstrating both fairness and decisiveness. In cases where subtle influence failed, she acted firmly, replacing recalcitrant officials with competent allies and ensuring that loyalty to her reign remained paramount. Her combination of persuasion and authority cemented her control over the court and the provinces. Hatshepsut also faced the challenge of perception among the populace. Egyptians were accustomed to male pharaohs as embodiments of strength and divine authority. To address potential skepticism, she leveraged ceremonial symbolism, monumental art, and public works. Reliefs depicted her with traditional masculine regalia, yet always emphasized her divine endorsement and effective governance. By controlling the visual and narrative representation of her reign, she shaped public perception, reinforcing acceptance and admiration among the people. Intrigue extended beyond the palace walls. Foreign powers occasionally tested Egypt's influence through trade disputes or diplomatic pressure. Hatshepsut, aware that military confrontation could destabilize internal support, preferred strategic diplomacy. She sent envoys bearing gifts, negotiated treaties, and showcased Egypt's wealth and sophistication to deter aggression. This combination of soft power and carefully monitored military readiness maintained security while reinforcing her image as a capable and visionary ruler. Hatshepsut's navigation of opposition was also deeply psychological. She studied human behavior, anticipating envy, ambition, and discontent among courtiers and officials. Her decisions were often preemptive. She could diffuse tension before it escalated, reward allies before loyalty faltered, and restructure administrative systems to limit the influence of potential adversaries. This skill, honed from years of education, observation, and early political experience, became one of her greatest assets. Despite her strategic brilliance, Hatshepsut's rule was not devoid of personal challenge. The constant awareness of scrutiny, the weight of expectation, and the necessity of performing authority without error imposed immense pressure. She endured moments of doubt, yet her resilience, intelligence, and vision allowed her to persevere. Each challenge became an opportunity to demonstrate competence, reinforce legitimacy, and cultivate loyalty. The court learned that resistance to her authority was futile, and her reputation as both wise and formidable grew steadily. Religious narratives continued to serve as a tool against opposition. Hatshepsut commissioned inscriptions depicting prophetic visions, divine selection, and her role as intermediary between gods and people. These stories, carved into stone in temples and monuments, were impossible to ignore. They reinforced her legitimacy, intimidated potential rivals, and ensured that her reign was remembered as both divinely sanctioned and politically competent. The intertwining of religious narrative and political strategy became a hallmark of her leadership, making her opposition increasingly cautious and compliant. Court intrigue also required careful management of public image. Hatshepsut staged processions, festivals, and ceremonies that displayed both grandeur and continuity. She appeared alongside Thutmose III, emphasizing dynastic legitimacy, yet subtly communicated her dominant authority. The careful choreography of visibility, ritual, and public engagement reinforced her position, making her reign appear natural and unquestionable. In this way, perception became a powerful tool in mitigating opposition. Hatshepsut also relied on written and visual propaganda to cement her authority. Monuments, stelae, and temple reliefs portrayed her as both pharaoh and divine chosen, combining masculine symbols of kingship with depictions of her unique intelligence and wisdom. By controlling the narrative of her reign, she shaped both contemporary and historical understanding of her rule. Opposition, whether internal or external, could not challenge the visual and textual evidence of her authority and competence. Even with such careful management, threats never fully disappeared. Ambitious nobles, skeptical priests, and foreign powers remained potential sources of challenge. Yet Hatshepsut's ability to anticipate, respond, and neutralize opposition ensured that these threats never coalesced into serious danger. Her skill lay not merely in reaction, but in preemption, creating loyalty, respect, and fear in advance of potential conflict. This mastery of court intrigue was as vital to her reign as her monumental projects, trade initiatives, and diplomatic engagements. By the later years of her reign, Hatshepsut had transformed potential opposition into a source of stability. Courtiers learned to respect and even admire her strategic brilliance. Priests embraced her divine narrative, and officials recognized the wisdom of loyalty. She had turned challenges into opportunities, consolidating power while demonstrating unparalleled skill in governance and political maneuvering. The court, once a potential source of instability, became a network of support, enabling her to implement her vision across Egypt. Hatshepsut's handling of challenges and opposition illustrates the complexity of leadership in ancient Egypt. It was not enough to claim the throne. A ruler had to maintain it, navigate competing interests, and manage perception at every level. Hatshepsut excelled in these tasks, combining intelligence, diplomacy, religious authority, and strategic foresight. Her ability to transform resistance into loyalty, ensured that her unprecedented reign as a female pharaoh would endure, both in her lifetime and in the historical record. As the Nile continued its eternal flow, carrying life and sustenance to the heart of Egypt, Hatshepsut's authority remained unshaken. Her reign, once challenged by skepticism and intrigue, had matured into a period of stability, prosperity, and cultural achievement. She had mastered the delicate balance of power, turning potential threats into instruments of her vision, and securing her place among the greatest rulers in history. Through careful navigation of court intrigue, Hatshepsut demonstrated that leadership is as much about strategy, perception, and psychology as it is about authority or wealth. Her skillful handling of opposition ensured that Egypt remained united, prosperous, and prepared for future challenges. The throne, once a precarious inheritance, had become a platform from which she could shape her kingdom's destiny with unmatched vision and intelligence. In this way, Hatshepsut's reign exemplified the art of governance, the management of power, and the resilience required to navigate opposition. She had not only secured her position, but had strengthened the foundations of Egypt itself, ensuring that her legacy would endure long after her rule. Her ability to navigate intrigue and adversity became a defining characteristic of her leadership, reflecting both her intelligence and her extraordinary capacity for strategic foresight. Legacy and the end of an era. Hatshepsut's reign, spanning over 2 decades, had transformed Egypt in ways that would echo through history. Her unprecedented ascent as a female pharaoh, her visionary approach to governance, and her ambitious programs of trade, architecture, and diplomacy marked her as one of the most remarkable rulers the ancient world had ever seen. Yet, as with all human endeavors, her era would eventually face its inevitable conclusion, and with it, the reflection on her achievements, influence, and the enduring legacy she would leave behind. In her later years, Hatshepsut maintained a careful balance of power, continuing to consolidate authority while preparing for the eventual transition to her stepson, Thutmose III. Though he had grown into adulthood and possessed the potential to claim the throne independently, Hatshepsut ensured that he remained under her guidance, both politically and symbolically. This period demanded extraordinary skill. She needed to safeguard her accomplishments while ensuring a smooth succession that preserved the stability of the kingdom. One of the hallmarks of Hatshepsut's late reign was the continued expansion of monumental architecture. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, already celebrated for its grandeur, became a focal point for ongoing additions and embellishments. Obelisks, statues, and shrines were commissioned across Egypt, each symbolizing her authority, piety, and divine connection. These projects were not merely acts of vanity, they reinforced her legitimacy, employed thousands of artisans, and demonstrated the kingdom's prosperity to both her subjects and foreign dignitaries. Through architecture, Hatshepsut ensured that her presence would remain physically and symbolically embedded in the landscape of Egypt for generations. Trade and foreign relations continued to flourish. Expeditions to Punt and other distant lands brought wealth, exotic goods, and diplomatic alliances, reinforcing Egypt's status as a powerful and cultured civilization. Hatshepsut's strategic diplomacy had not only increased Egypt's material wealth but also enhanced its prestige on the global stage. Her ability to negotiate, communicate, and display Egypt's resources and sophistication deterred potential adversaries and encouraged cooperation among neighboring kingdoms. Hatshepsut's internal governance remained equally meticulous. She oversaw the administration of the provinces, ensured the equitable collection of taxes, and maintained agricultural productivity along the Nile. Her attentiveness to both the macro and micro aspects of leadership allowed Egypt to thrive under her rule. Stability, economic growth, and social cohesion were hallmarks of her administration, demonstrating that her reign was as effective in practice as it was celebrated in symbolism. Religious devotion continued to be central to her strategy and identity. Hatshepsut strengthened the cult of Amun, endowed temples, and commissioned inscriptions and rituals that intertwined her authority with divine will. She presented herself as both the servant and chosen representative of the gods, a role that reinforced her legitimacy and commanded loyalty from both the priesthood and the populace. Her understanding of the inseparable nature of spiritual and political authority allowed her to consolidate power while sustaining the cultural and religious life of Egypt. Despite her remarkable accomplishments, the end of Hatshepsut's reign was accompanied by challenges, both subtle and overt. Thutmose III, growing into his full authority, had supporters who quietly awaited the moment to assert his independence. Hatshepsut had spent decades guiding him, shaping his education, and positioning him publicly as the legitimate heir. Yet the natural dynamics of succession meant that the balance of power would eventually shift. Hatshepsut navigated these final years with a combination of prudence, diplomacy, and continued displays of competence, ensuring that the transition would not destabilize the kingdom. Historical evidence suggests that Hatshepsut may have faced internal court tensions, possibly from officials or nobles loyal to the traditional male pharaoh line. While records are limited, the later attempts by Thutmose III's successors to erase Hatshepsut's memory indicate that opposition existed, whether during her life or posthumously. Nevertheless, her ability to maintain authority for over 20 years, to govern effectively, and to leave a stable kingdom speaks to her extraordinary skill as a ruler and strategist. Hatshepsut's death, occurring around 1458 BCE, marked the conclusion of an era. Her passing was the end of the first extended period in which Egypt was ruled by a woman exercising full pharaonic authority. She left behind a kingdom rich in wealth, architectural marvels, and international influence. The prosperity she had cultivated, the monuments she had commissioned, and the alliances she had forged were enduring testaments to her vision and leadership. Her legacy, however, was more than material. Hatshepsut redefined what it meant to rule Egypt. She demonstrated that authority was not inherently tied to gender, but to intelligence, strategic foresight, legitimacy, and the ability to inspire loyalty. By navigating opposition, consolidating power, and exercising her role with both wisdom and ambition, she created a model of leadership that challenged and expanded societal expectations. Her reign became a symbol of possibility, illustrating that audacity and vision could overcome deeply entrenched norms. In the centuries following her death, attempts were made to erase Hatshepsut's memory. Monuments were defaced, inscriptions were altered, and her images were sometimes chiseled away. Scholars debate the motives, political, dynastic, or personal, but the attempt could not fully obliterate her achievements. Modern archaeology and scholarship have restored Hatshepsut's story, revealing the extraordinary scope of her accomplishments and the enduring impact of her reign. The temples, obelisks, and inscriptions that survive continue to testify to her intelligence, vision, and authority. Hatshepsut's impact on architecture, trade, religion, and governance set a precedent for subsequent pharaohs. Thutmose III, who eventually assumed full power, inherited a kingdom strengthened and enriched by her policies. The administrative structures, trade networks, and monumental constructions she established facilitated further prosperity and expansion. Her influence persisted not only in tangible achievements but in the strategic approaches she pioneered, combining diplomacy, economic foresight, religious authority, and political acumen. Culturally, Hatshepsut's reign contributed to a flourishing of art, literature, and ceremonial innovation. By commissioning monumental projects and supporting the priesthood, she encouraged the creation of works that celebrated divine favor, royal authority, and historical continuity. These cultural contributions enriched Egyptian society, leaving a legacy of aesthetic, intellectual, and spiritual achievement that continued long after her reign. Ultimately, Hatshepsut's story is one of vision, resilience, and mastery of power. From a princess observing court politics to a regent guiding a young king, and finally to a pharaoh commanding the full authority of Egypt, she exemplified leadership that combined intelligence, strategy, and moral authority. She faced skepticism, opposition, and the weight of tradition, yet she transformed challenges into opportunities and asserted a reign that reshaped Egypt's political, economic, and cultural landscape. Her life illustrates the interplay between human ambition, divine narrative, and historical circumstance. Hatshepsut's ability to navigate court intrigue, consolidate authority, and expand Egypt's prosperity demonstrates the qualities of an exceptional leader: foresight, intelligence, adaptability, and the courage to defy convention. She left a kingdom stronger, wealthier, and more culturally vibrant than she had inherited, and her monuments continue to inspire awe and admiration. Hatshepsut's enduring legacy lies not only in her accomplishments but in the example she set. She showed that leadership is defined not by gender but by vision, skill, and the ability to navigate complex realities with intelligence and resilience. Egypt remembers her as a pharaoh of unprecedented achievement, a ruler whose impact shaped the course of history, and a figure whose life continues to captivate and inspire. As the sands of time shifted and dynasties rose and fell along the Nile, the story of Hatshepsut remained, a testament to ambition, strategy, and the extraordinary potential of a woman who became one of the greatest pharaohs in history. Her reign, etched in stone and memory, endures as a symbol of what can be achieved when courage, intelligence, and vision converge, leaving an indelible mark on civilization itself.